Hi. Welcome back to our next Fabric Fast session. Fast standing for Fabric at Scale Together. It's our content designed to help our partners get up to speed on Fabric. And we're placing this content online, not just for our partners, but also for everybody, allowing you to find the content that could be most useful for you. In this session, Alan Kleinert is going to walk us through Fabric Data Warehouse, discuss its capabilities and new features, and give us a live demo of using it along with Copilot. So without further delay, I'll turn it over to Alan.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brian. So first of all, everybody can see the screen still?
I got
perfect. All right, so for those of you that don't know me, my name is Alan Kleinert, Senior Partner Solution Architect for America's GPS or Global Partner Solutions. I specialize in data and analytics, IoT, and also leading a lot of the Fabric initiatives for our partners. So nice to meet everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the data warehouse portion of Fabric and just the agenda I've put together for today. We're going to do the quick ins and outs of data warehouse, start to hammer into the key features, what makes data warehouse so special, and then to avoid the death by PowerPoint, if you will, let's get into the fun stuff and actually get into exploration on what some of the tools and features look like in a hands-on fashion. All right, so let's get into the warehouse overview portion. And before we get too deep into warehouse, I think it's just a good opportunity to have a little bit of a refresher from the last session, which was introduction to Fabric, right? So Chris went over a lot of the different things, but some of these key core concepts, which I'm about to go over, play deep into data warehouse and some of the things we're going to be talking about. So first of all, I'm not going to spend too much time here because we just did a whole session on it. But in general, right, we have Fabric, right? That is a unified platform. So all of these different pillars are available in a SaaS offering, so software as a service. So much like we just log into Power BI today and just use it, the same applies to this and all the tools in the tool belt. So we're less concerned with the overhead of infrastructure and all the different provisioning that would be required. And we're just off to the races using the technology and making the most impact. What comes around with comes with this unified platform is the single architectures involved with compute and storage. So the serverless compute that you see on the screen here is interchangeably throughout all of these pillars and shared intelligently with bursting and smoothing. In addition to a single architecture for compute, there's also a single architecture for storage, which is OneLake. You can think of OneLake kind of like ADLS Gen 2 or a storage account concept behind the scenes, but it is the glue, right, that really makes this flexible and interchangeable across all of the pillars. So that data gravity story that Chris was talking about in the last session, applies here when we talk about shortcuts. You can think about like that logical link to external data, sometimes in even different cloud providers that surfaces that data within OneLake as if it were native. And this is without copying the data. Or mirroring, right? There was an example with mirroring where this is single point click configuration and you're getting replication of data into OneLake. And then of course, open access APIs, right? So whether you're using Databricks or Foundry or CI/CD and DevOps, there's many different ways to get into Fabric. And it's open by design, right? We want to play well with others so that we can make the most impact for your solutions. In addition to this data gravity story, we have Dataflow Gen 2, which is similar to Power Query, as well as pipelines, similar to Azure Data Factory, if you're familiar with that. And that comes with a slew of different connectors to your favorite data sources. So I just wanted to take the time to level set on some of these core principles before we kind of deep dive into data warehouse pillars specifically. Again, just to rehash that, SaaS, software as a service, single architectures for both compute and storage that are separated, and everything kind of plays well together. So at play today is data warehouse, right? You can think about data warehouse in more conventional means, right? So this is going to be fact dimension, star schema, lots of heavy T-SQL and stored procedures. This is schema on write architecture, which means that the data needs to adhere to the structure that's in play at the warehouse, which is the opposite of schema on read architecture, which you would see with your lakehouse concepts. What makes Fabric Data Warehouse stand out? And there's some different categories here that I'll just briefly go through. And this one's a big one, is it's simplified developer experience. And we're going to hit home on this in the demo, just how easy some of these activities can be with things like Copilot. The fact that there's no provisioning, the fact that there's many ways to get at the data, right? So whether it's visual query or T-SQL or notebooks, we really do want to make this flexible and designed around the consumer choice, right? The next one, we hit home OneLake, how important that is. All of the data from Data Warehouse is stored in OneLake as Delta Parquet on the back end. And this is in a fully managed state, so you're not responsible for vacuum and compaction and optimization. That's done intelligently for you. V-order, which makes the reads amazing from a Delta Parquet standpoint. So it is the glue that makes this interchangeable throughout all the other pillars and external services as well. Fully serverless and on-demand compute. So we may be familiar with Synapse and dedicated SQL pool, or maybe different warehouses that have traditional physical resources where you're locked into static compute. In this case, right, it's going to be pay by the SIP model. You execute a query, it's going to use what it needs, and then it's going to scale back down. This one's huge, and we'll see this play out in many different ways, but just the ease of consumption, right? So you have all this data sitting in a warehouse or maybe multiple warehouses. As you go through the different personas of a data scientist, a data engineer, a business analyst, right? I can easily get into Power BI from my warehouse. I can easily get into a notebook from my warehouse. Whether it's data flow or pipelines, all of that is super integrated, and it's never been easier, right, to get access to that data and just focus on the data impact. Enterprise ready, right? This is a big one, not the most popular one, but if we're going to have a world-class warehouse, we have to have some of these security controls, like the different control planes, the monitoring, the cataloging, the governance structure around our data. So there's a lot that's been done on top of Data Warehouse and with Fabric to get at that enterprise-ready lens. This one to me is the last one is kind of the coolest one, to be honest, or one of the coolest things, just because I've spent a ton of time in traditional warehouse on the maintenance aspect of data. So whether it's data modeling or data design, the hash distributions, the partitioning, like the complex caching architectures, like you can have a warehouse that's ready to rock, right? And 6 months later, if you don't do the right things, it's going to be poor performance or it might not work right and all these different things. So having AI that's doing most of that legwork, and we'll go through the different ways that it's doing that, where the burden is off the consumer at this point, and you're just using the platform for what it is a huge differentiator from some of the more legacy technologies that we've been working with in the past. So just quickly, a little bit of the warehouse engine here, kind of how it works. So the SQL engine's comprised of the MPP, which stands for mass parallel processing. So you can think of kind of all these worker bees going out and crunching data and then kind of reducing back to an answer. I just talked a little bit about the AI and how it's taking the compute and optimizing it and doing these different things. And then the serverless compute we talked about as well. All of that equates to storing the data in a very performant and efficient way in Delta Parquet at the OneLake layer. So I'd like to walk through just a couple different scenarios that I see with a lot of our partners and customers. And this is the most boilerplate one, to be honest. So you can have structured data, maybe even some semi-structured data like CSVs and things like that you need to get into, schema on write architecture into the data warehouse. So if you're using Fabric tools, more than likely you're going to be using pipelines or data flow Gen 2. and you're going to be taking that data, transforming it or loading it into warehouse. The transformation, like I said, this does have the traditional look and feel of a warehouse. So you're typically going to be using stored procedures or heavy T-SQL operations to do your data gymnastics. Most folks typically use something like pipelines for orchestration, right? So it's going to have schedules and sequence and different things to be able to perform, your data operations as expected. Once the data is curated and readily available in warehouse, right, you have a SQL endpoint. So just like we connect with SSMS and VS Code or JDBC, ODBC, all of those like tool of choice, applications that you're building would still be able to connect in the same ways that we do today. And then the one of the coolest parts, which is on a previous slide, is just the end through end ability to you procure the data, curate the data, to visualize the data. So now that Power BI is part of the Fabric stack, it's really just a few clicks and you're off to the races and doing reporting and analytics, which is pretty cool. So this one's a little bit different and new. So it's taking a architecture that is historically known for lakehouse. And so you may have heard medallion architecture, where we're talking about bronze, silver, gold, kind of like the Olympic strategy, if you will. So, bronze is really this raw stage where you don't want to change the data at all. It's just a landing spot. So maybe you drop a whole bunch of CSVs or different data types there. It could be ADOS Gen 2, could be OneLake, could be something else, but that's just as is data. Now, instead of using Spark to get from your raw or bronze to silver, and really that process is about curating data, cleansing data, so normalization, deduplication, things like that. It's typically done with Spark notebooks and heavy on the Spark side. But you can do that now with stored procedures in the same fashion. So you get the data from raw to silver in a cleansed state. And then from silver to gold is really about use case specific or specific scenarios. So maybe I want to take the cleansed data and I want to do some complex joins. I want to do some calculated columns to serve a specific purpose, right? So whatever reporting it might be. And you can see these two lines, right? Both go to the same different, stacks here of apps, querying, reporting. That's because sometimes you have exploration, right? You don't know what you don't know. So you may have some querying that you actually want to do at the silver stage. You just want to look at the cleansed data, how it lays, in order to interpret how you might create gold later on, if that makes sense. So this is a question we get all the time, and I think we're probably going to spend some time on this later as well, but why warehouse, right? We've looked at Fabric, and there's so many different things, right? You have event house, you have lake house, you got the warehouse. When do I use what and why and when? All these different questions. So warehouse, and I'm just going to pick on a couple of these that I've actually seen, in the field from our partners and customers, like the why would I use or go the direction of warehouse? So the first one is a lot of folks are SQL shops, right? Let's just call it what it is. You may have 20, 40 people, whatever it is, that know T-SQL in and out, live and breathe T-SQL. And so, it doesn't necessarily make sense to just move to a lakehouse or a modern lakehouse design when the skills don't line up, and you might have a huge learning curve. So then you have to ask, is the juice kind of worth the squeeze? In many cases, it's not. So SQL shops tend to lean towards, let's use Fabric Warehouse. It's more one-to-one versus relearning some different skills and architectures and things like that. The second one trend that I see is more on the migration effort. So you may have customers or partners that are saying, I do want to do the lakehouse design, but currently our lift and shift, right, our current solution is all T-SQL, is all stored procedures, and it's, could be hundreds or thousands of stored procedures in some cases. And so to rewrite those into Spark or Lakehouse would be short of a nightmare, right? So stored procedures are not supported in Spark, multi-table transactions. Can it be done? Are some people doing it? Yes. However, right, again, back to is the juice worth the squeeze? Time to value, some of those things in the equation. So again, if you're SQL shop or if you're migrating like heavy SQL, those are a lot of the reasons why I've seen so far that people tend to stay within the warehouse confines. I'm just going to check the chat here, make sure we have any questions. Okay, still doing good.
Yeah, good to go.
All right. So that was kind of the overview. I want to go through kind of more in depth on some of these key features, if you will, when we talk about traditional data warehouses versus Fabric and things like that. So I'm not going to drain this slide, but essentially, with the copy activities, the CTAS, or so that stands for create table as select, right? There's a lot of ways to move massive amounts of data and really leverage that MPP engine that we saw on an earlier slide to make this truly scalable. So whether you're using a petabyte worth of data or you're using a small amount of data or you're somewhere in between, typically it's going to fit the bill here. The integration with data pipelines in order to really orchestrate all your stored procedures and management layers and process control is huge too, right? So just short sum this slide up, very, very scalable and enterprise ready from that fashion. This one I absolutely love, and I don't know if it's just because of all the, maybe we'll call it trauma from being in the trenches of trying to co-locate many different warehouses and data sources into one place for combined reporting. But the idea that if the partner or customer is leveraging Fabric from a tenant perspective or organization standpoint, and they're starting to commit and have a whole bunch of different warehouses within it, right? It can be lake houses, warehouses. There's different ways to bring Event House into this as well. But imagine you have hundreds of different warehouses at your disposal, and in one single pane of glass, I can add them and start to cross query between them and also materialize views, right, for consumption that represents multiple warehouses without ever really lifting a finger, right? And so if you've ever been in kind of the business of moving data and combined reporting, it can be, again, very, very complex and not the most ideal. So the fact that you can do this, again, one single pane without lifting a finger, to me just is super cool. Now it does require, right, the fact that this would be rendered useless if none of your data is in Fabric, right? If you don't have a lot of warehouses, or you have shortcuts that are leveraging data outside, those type of things. If it doesn't exist somehow within Fabric, right, you're not going to be able to take advantage of the cross query at this point. So. Yeah, so Joshua asked a question. I'm actually going to show this in the demo. I know the screenshot here is a little bit small, but I'll just kind of show you what the single pane is and then how to add a new warehouse and then the cross query capabilities. So I'll come back to this question after I show that and just see if that answers it. So the materialization, maybe I probably misspoke on that word. I'm really just talking about you can create a view, right, that can be recognized in the warehouse, that behind the scenes is actually linking to all the other different warehouses that you may have joined. So it would show up in the warehouse that you ran the query in, and I can demonstrate that one as well. All right, so next, the fully integrated into Power BI semantic layer. Spoiler alert, that's the next session, right? It's going to be all about semantic models. So please attend the next one if you want to deep dive into that. I think there'll be pretty good content there. But in general, every warehouse gets a default semantic model. So assuming you have your primary keys, your foreign keys, and all those different constraints set up, you'll automatically get some of these different relationships out of the box, right? And you can set up automatic updates as well. So as new tables come in, those get populated, and it just makes it super easy to go from warehouse to reporting, kind of in an automated way. Of course, like if you have hundreds of different tables, you can certainly do a custom semantic model where you just pick and choose what you want. You can even adjust the relationships from a logical standpoint, and you can be off to the races that way as well. One of the cool things with how things are set up with Delta Parquet at the warehouse and the lakehouse level is what we call direct lake mode. So when we think about Delta Parquet, Parquet is really just a file-based architecture that is actually the opposite, schema on read, right? And so historically, when we talk about back in the Hadoop days, or even when we just had Parquet, like the visualization piece of a data lake was missing altogether. Like there was ways to do it, but it was not performant. It was not performant to the point that nobody really wanted to do it. So you would often have to take data lake data and put it into a resource that can do the visualization, like Azure SQL DB or something to that extent. So direct lake mode, when it was released with Fabric, is huge. So for like the first time, we're able to get fast and real-time reporting off of Delta Parquet files, right? And so since the warehouse is storing Delta Parquet as well as the lakehouse, both benefit from this. So if we start at the top, direct query mode, slow but real-time. When you look at the data warehouse, lakehouse icon here, it's kind of that middle management layer. So it has to do the interpretation, the scan, and it's got to relay that back to Power BI analysis services. So this does it inline in real time, but if you're doing complex queries or if you're doing a whole bunch of data, it's not often the most performant, right? So it can lack in that front. Import mode is super fast, but guess what? You have to duplicate the data. So you're doing that heavy scan, but then you're caching all that data locally as a duplicate. So if you're doing big data, for example, that's probably going to lack. There's a lot of different limitations here. Direct lake mode simply goes directly to one lake. So it passes the whole data warehouse, lakehouse engines, all the interpretation layers. It's simply going to run Fabric CU at the source where the data is. And it does this in a super performant way. And that's where some of like the V ordering and things like that come into play. But for the first time, we can actually have meaningful visualization that's performant in a lakehouse architecture, as well as just the Delta Parquet architecture at the storage layer. Just reading the question here. Where does Microsoft Fabric store and manage the metadata? So the metadata for assets, typically you would use something like Purview. There is some functionality within Fabric that does allow for like lineage and that type of stuff, but because it is SaaS, I don't know if it's necessarily stored where you can access some of it, but the storage layer for everything is one lake. But if you really wanted to get deep into data governance, we highly recommend leveraging a service like Purview that gets deep into the cataloging, management of metadata across all of the different pillars within Fabric. All right, so no knobs performance at scale with open data format. So Delta Parquet is that open data format. So you are able to get at that with different tools like Databricks and so forth. So I won't get too lost in kind of these different items here like SQL Server query optimization and VertiPack, Polaris, but just know this is multi-node distribution, MPP, petabytes at scale. It can do a lot of work in a performant way. So here's the fun part I was talking about on an earlier slide is like how cool is it for like the maintenance side of the house, especially when we're talking about warehouse, that a lot of this stuff is now done intelligently for you. So the first one is autonomous workload, right? So it'll actually detect whether your T-SQL is a query or if it's doing some sort of ingestion, like a store procedure, and it'll bucketize those workloads and allocate different compute that corresponds to the need, right? So you don't necessarily have an ingestion that's taking up so much, CU. You can say, well, this ETL takes a long time, and it's going to bucket here and give it a limited amount of resources to go do that ingestion versus a query where we really want performance. So we don't really necessarily want to cap that one. And so you can actually dynamically allocate compute to optimize those queries, scale up, scale down kind of way. So again, that's just another AI example, like intelligently determining what you're doing and then adjusting the compute for that process. Same thing for this multi-tiered caching. So it's analyzing, it's saying what queries are being ran the most. I want to know about it, right? And we're going to put that in cache. So over time, I can start to make the consumers happy, right? So, result caching isn't going to help you with a brand new, net new database, right? Because nothing's happened at that point. But you give it some data, some repetitive data of, maybe some long running queries. That might be an example. Maybe some repetitive queries. It's going to start intelligently caching on your behalf. Again, you don't have to do anything for that. And so that's just another unique example of AI. Query optimization. So we talk about query plants, right? When we talk about auto create statistics and auto update statistics, looking at queries and really making the best of them. Are they missing statistics? It does a lot of this, analyzing for you. And so again, it's time to value, right? This has been a headache, right, in a lot of different warehouses where you have to spend a ton of time getting it right. There's a lot of maintenance that's involved for a warehouse. And so I think it's awesome. Is it perfect? No. Is it going to get there? I hope so, right? But it's a pretty unique capability that's saving a lot of folks' time. Won't spend too much time on this one, but this exists in other warehouses, even Synapse, for example. But the ability to have some purview, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended, of what's happening in your system, right? So, what are some of the long queries that are running? What are some of the most repetitive queries? Those type of things. So you have intuitive way of looking at the footprint of what's happening from a SQL perspective. And then the last one before we get into the demo, secure by default, right? Security is super important for Microsoft. We believe that's what sets us from the pack. But control planes, security control planes from workspaces to the artifacts that exist within the workspaces, to your traditional warehouse security, grant select on, et cetera, to sensitivity labels, which may be new for some folks, right? So OneDrive, just like we have with OneDrive, we have general, confidential, et cetera. We can start to classify our data within one like the same way. And then getting even more granular, from the data perspective, we have things like data masking. So maybe you have some credit card information or PI that you want to mask out, social security numbers based on who you are. You have row level, column level security. So there's a lot of different controls even at the data level. Okay, I'm just going to scan through here real quick.
Hey, Alan. Yeah, I was talking. Well, I see a few in the chat that I'm responding to, but a few of the questions are about. We can talk about some of these here live now, or I could get to them in the chat, depending on how much time we've got. But let's
Yeah,
some of these
maybe
you've already
we
answered, but
maybe we do the demo just to make sure the content's done, and then whatever questions we have left over, we'll get to that. Does that sound like a plan?
that sounds good.
All right, thank you. So let's switch gears a little bit into showcasing some of the different capabilities in Fabric, right? So it's one thing to talk about it, but it's another thing to kind of see it. So much like we did in the first session and we'll do in the subsequent sessions, we want to get an opportunity to kind of showcase some of these things. So let's get started. I have a need for a new workspace. So I'm just going to grab one real quick, and we'll call it Fabric Fast. What's today? Wednesday. Sounds good to me. And one thing I want to check, because we are going to be using Copilot, at least as it exists today, an F64 SKU is required to be able to leverage Copilot. So I just want to verify real quick that indeed I am active with an F64, which I am. Great. So of course, today we're talking about warehouse. So it only makes sense that we create one. And we'll just call this, not Lakehouse. Let's do warehouse. Perfect. And this will just take a couple seconds, hopefully. You never know on demo days. So that's my asterisk for the day. All right, so far so good. So that's just loading. If we take a look at this Explorer, that's going to look very similar to what we see in SSMS, right? You've got your schema, security, DBO. We look at tables, views. There's nothing in here. So we just kind of take a look at the ribbon here. We see refresh. There's some settings. And this get data option, you can see from a Fabric standpoint, again, you can put data in here different ways outside of Fabric. Well, you see two options, data flow gen 2 and data pipelines. So just want to showcase how easy data flow gen 2 can be for working with the warehouse is if of interest, right? And so this is kind of a low code. I would say low code's probably the best explanation. In some cases, it can be no code depending on what you're doing. But you can see this is really Power Query. So if you're familiar with Power BI, Power Query, the look and feel of this is going to be very, very similar. So in this case, not too concerned about the data, we're more concerned about the features, right? So when we look at the connectors, just to showcase that data gravity story we were talking about, there's a whole bunch of them. So between pipelines and data flow gen 2, more than likely, there's going to be a connector that meets the bill. In our case, I'm just going to pick up some data from a different warehouse, actually. And we're going to use worldwide importers. So it's just going to be some sales data, fact dimension style. So we'll have a bunch of dimensions, customers, employees, etc. But in our case, again, we're focused less on the data and more on the features. So I'm going to pick fact sale. I'm going to pick dimension customer. This usually gives you a preview of the data quite quickly. It's spinning a little wheel of death here, but there we go. And once I create, I now have two nodes, if you will, that represent dimension customers and fact sale. So if I click on fact sale, I'm going to see the data here too. So dimension customers, I was just playing around with this last night, and one of the cool features throughout all of these pillars, you do have your sidekick or modern day Clippy, if you will, called Copilot, right? And so I was just curious, when I look at the customer column, I see the name of the customer, but I also see a city and state. I was like, I wonder, working with Copilot, how easy it would be, or maybe how hard it would be, I don't know, to get just the acronym of the state in a new derived column, if you will. So here's the prompt that I came up with. And this is AI, so sometimes the answer is not consistent from one query to the next, as we know, but we'll see. So I just said basically, can you create a new column called state and derive the state based on the customer column in parentheses? So I fully qualified it. The more information we give Copilot, the better our results are going to be. So I said customer data equals wingtip toys Belco, Oklahoma, which I just picked on line number 2 here. Should have state equals okay. Please only include the 2-letter acronym. So let's see how well this works. Obviously, if it doesn't work, you can go back and forth with Copilot and try to adjust and make sense. But let's see how we do. And I have seen varied results where the state might actually include the city and the state. And they'll say, you know what, Copilot, that's not what I wanted. Can you just do, the 2-letter acronym for the state? And then it'll clarify for that. But you can see I did hardly any work. I just wrote, just like I'm having a conversation with you all, I had a conversation with Copilot. And as you can see, Wings, Tips, Toys, Belco, Oklahoma now has a derived column that includes my state, right? So sometimes maybe you're not into Copilot, or for whatever reason, it doesn't make sense. But we can look at what it actually did from a formula standpoint. So if I think about, well, I'm not too familiar with, the Power Query formulas, it might have taken me a long time to come up with this potentially, right? So, I just did that in a matter of, minutes to seconds, or seconds to minutes. One thing that we can do in addition is do manual work, right? So I want to merge some queries, and it can be very easy. So I want to merge my fact sale to my dimension customer, and I'm going to obviously do that on customer key. So I can just click customer key. I'll do a left outer join. That sounds great. Okay, you're off to the races. So you can see this is a very low code. I say low code because there was some formulas and stuff that can happen, but it doesn't have to be. Now the destination warehouse is the warehouse that we're working in. So once I hit publish, all of this data, my new column, and then the join of fact sale dimension customer will be loaded into the warehouse with Delta Parquet on the underlying. So just, again, we're not going to get too deep in this, but you can do tons of transformation, pivot, statistics, whatever it might be within Dataflow Gen 2 and work directly with your warehouse. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We'll go back to here. Oh, I gotta close this up. I'm just going to show pipelines. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with pipelines, but the look and feel has been around for a long time with Azure Data Factory. So the other one, New Data Pipeline, again, I don't know if we need to spend too much time with it because a lot of the capabilities are the same or enhanced, right? Enhanced being, like Copilot. So pipeline activities, again, the look and feel looks very similar to Azure Data Factory. You can use the copy data assistant to kind of give you step-by-steps. But for example, just very baseline copy data source, right? You can go through, hook up sample data, or this is where you make connections to whatever. Your destination, right? You can click your Fabric Fast warehouse, do any sort of mapping, those type of things. And then you ultimately validate, run, or schedule this, right? But from here, more importantly, if you're doing, it goes beyond just copying data. So you can orchestrate. So I can do a full load here. Maybe I want to add a stored procedure to after this is done. So I go on my stored procedure and a couple different clicks, right? My warehouse, select a stored procedure that I want to run after initial load. Maybe after the initial load and store procedure, there's a Databricks job or there's a Spark notebook within Fabric. So you can kind of do this sequence thing of running things in parallel, is running things in sequence, and use this kind of as your ultimate scheduler and orchestrator of all things Fabric, and also outside of Fabric as well. All right, so if we go to another warehouse that I have set up, actually, before we do that, give me 1 second. One cool feature that I came across with Copilot and pipelines, because you can do the same thing here, right? So I can say, hey, build me a copy data, build me a stored procedure, and it'll start to do those things for you too. But if you've ever had Azure Data Factory kind of in an enterprise fashion, you'll realize like this screen can be, 50 deep of different nodes and, for loops and whatever, right? And different nested things. So one cool feature of Copilot is you can actually summarize the pipeline, and it'll go ahead and analyze what's being done in all of these jobs for you and give you a verbal output. So to me, that's pretty cool. Not necessarily for this demonstration here, because there's not much going on. But again, imagine you have more real world stuff going on. It's never this easy, right? You have a lot more stuff going on. And so you can get a better look without, taking an hour to drill down, see source, destination, mapping, etc. So that's a pretty cool feature. All right, so let's get back to the warehouse. I just wanted, again, these two components, Dataflow Gen 2 pipelines, are very important, and not just from an orchestration standpoint, but also data movement. So you may use these tools, when you're leveraging a warehouse. So just like any warehouse, this has the fact, tables and dimension tables for worldwide importers. So it's got a whole bunch of different sales data in there. Just like SSMS, except it says Copilot, auto-suggest, and all those different things. So Azure writing SQL, you do the tab functionality, and it can offer different adjustments and optimization Azure writing queries. So nothing too fancy from this perspective, except that you have some Copilot help that's auto-integrated. But let's say you're not T-SQL heavy, right? Within warehouse, you have something similar to Dataflow Gen 2, and it's called Visual Query. And so the idea is that you can do things without knowing SQL. And so it's really drag and drop. So I just drag my fax sale, maybe customer again, just to showcase. And, again, we could do like a simple join again, and it's going to look very similar. So fact sale, dimension customer, customer key, and then the type of join that you want. Okay, cool. And then from here, right, it generates the SQL. Behind the scenes, you can do save as view. So if you wanted to have this as a view within your warehouse, and again, I didn't really do anything. I merged a couple tables. I could add a column. You can do some very basic stuff within here without having to know SQL. So that's one cool technology. Another one that just came out is SQL query in notebooks. So, we do have code first approach teams, right, that spend all of their time in notebooks. And so the thought process here was, why do those folks, when dealing with a warehouse, right, or SQL DB or whatever, have to make this super jump to an entire different platform, right? So why do I need to go to the warehouse UI to actually execute SQL? I want to do it within my notebook so I can do my markdown, I can do all that fun stuff. So that's where this came out, right? So you can actually execute your T-SQL directly in a notebook. And now you're in a comfort area for those teams. So just another added capability of playing well with all different lenses. All right, so let's take a look back. That covers kind of the different SQL lenses. SQL templates here is just kind of giving you a head start. So nothing super special here. I'm on a create a stored procedure. Here's the structure for it. Query activity, we had a slide on that. But essentially getting that footprint view of all the different things that are happening within your warehouse from a query lens. So hopefully this loads here in a minute just to kind of show you. Come on. It's trying. Okay, so I can see all of the queries, frequently run queries that keep happening, right? And then you can start to pull some different trends from that, or maybe you have a query that's long running and you need to kill it, those type of things. And then model layouts, I'm not going to spend too much time here because Chris in the next session is going to go super deep into semantic models. But you can see the fact has all the cardinality, one-to-many relationships with the different keys. So this is set up very well. If I wanted a new report, I can just create a new report off this default semantic model. and I'm off to the races, right? Automatically update semantic models. We talked about that. So if there's new tables, it'll pick those up on the fly, new relationships, those type of things. And then you can always create a custom semantic model. So if you want to reduce the footprint, change your relationships, and you don't want that to impact the rest of, the analyst, you can do so. And I think that basically sums up kind of the pane here, some different options that you can see. So the last thing I'm going to do, I don't know if I have too much time, but just to kind of explore some data with Copilot. Clearly, I have a fact in dimension and or fact and dimension tables. I actually want to see, just kind of a taste of what they look like all together, right? And so when you execute Copilot, it's going to give you, a result that you can either copy the SQL or insert it directly. I just do the insert directly. I need to get rid of this, sorry. And then always run it just to see if there's any errors or anything like that. So the number step 7 is what I really like, is it cleared everything up and cleaned it up for me, right? And so now I have an accurate picture of all of the dimensions and all the data at play. So you can take that even further, right? If you're doing some data exploration or troubleshooting. So I say that it's great. Now I'd like to run the same query, but filter for customers who just have a specific customer called Tailspin Toys and a delivery date of 2000. So maybe I'm doing some cold case work or whatever it might be, just as an example, but it'll generate that query for me as well. And sometimes it does get it wrong, and sometimes it errors out. When it does error out, what's cool, and I'm not sure it'll do it for me, it's grayed out right now, but there's this fixed query errors, which is really cool. So if there's a syntax error or the logic's bad, you can simply hit this fixed query errors, or you can actually tell Copilot in here that you have an issue and what the error is, and then it'll automatically edit within the code. So you don't actually have to copy a new thing or anything like that. So you can see it created the Tailspin Toys, like all that fun stuff. And now I only have 0321 and the, Tailspin company. The last thing, I don't know if I have time, but the combined query piece of it. So let's do this. Let's see how it works. So I want to create a view that takes the Fabric Fast warehouse, fact.sale, and joins all of its dimensions, and then union it with a Fabric Fast Lakehouse, fact.sale, and all of its dimensions for combined reporting. So the combined reporting piece here, if I go to the warehouse, I see a lakehouse that actually have a whole bunch of data. So we could actually consider the warehouse that we're in now as maybe North America sales data. The lakehouse that I'm about to bring in, which is a read-only warehouse, is going to be, let's say, LATAM. And I want to combine those for reporting. So just like that, I now have a lakehouse here that I can start to cross query on. And so when I ask this question, I want to create a view that basically combines LATAM and North America. All of a sudden I have a view that I can start to leverage without doing any of the work, really. So it's just a couple of examples. Now I do know I have a couple other more examples, but I ran out of time. So let's kind of kick it back to Q&A.
Thanks for watching our session. Our calls to action for our partners: join our Fabric partner community on Teams. The Fabric engineering team hosts regular calls on technical topics as well as AMAs with our leadership team. And the Teams channel provides a great way for you to participate in ongoing discussion and ask any questions you might have. And while we hope to see you in one of our hands-on workshops, we also have lots of learning opportunities in our Fabric learning paths, so dozens of hours of content are available to help get you up to speed and keep you updated on the latest enhancements. And finally, if you're interested in hosting your own in-a-day workshops, such as Fabric Analyst in a Day or Real-Time Intelligence in a Day, reach out to us and get started. I'll paste all of these links in the description below. Thanks for watching.